Literacy. We all know that this means reading, but what if I told you that there's a lot more you can read than just a book, as deciphering a language can translate to a great many things, such as music, binary code, or even professional wrestling. The ability to read what goes on inside the squared circle seems to be something that a lot of fans have forgotten, or never learned in the first place. Which is a real shame, but it's one that we can rectify. Especially if it's the topic of this episode, because today... A big thank you to my supporters over on Patreon, such as Dakari Garmin, Mr. J, Ron Hawthorne, Mangy Stray, Harry Flynn, and The Reflection of Perfection. Thank you so much for all the help, it really does mean a lot. Alright, well I know we tend not to think of it as such. As I read in an old video game magazine, this really is a language. And no, it may not be in the traditional sense, but it is a way to communicate a message to an interpreter. And that interpreter just happens to be a computer, but it still counts nevertheless. Furthermore, like any language, this has evolved. If anyone remembers those old claw joysticks and that weird controller with the cards that you slid into, you know that this wasn't always the standard as it is now. And sure, there may be a few additional bells and whistles that have been added to this, such as shoulder buttons and rumble packs and all that, but all the same, this basic layout is the standard formula for how video games are controlled. But additionally, this language is also a two-way street, because not only do we push right to go right when we want the video game character to move across the screen, but this video game also tells us how it wants to be played from how it was programmed. For example, if I tell you to do a Hadouken or the Contra code, many of you instantaneously know what I'm talking about. But when we're talking about all this, as fascinating as it might be, I'm sure some of you are wondering, what does any of it have to do with professional wrestling? Well, this just serves as an illustration to let you know that this conversation of wrestling literacy, well, is a loaded one, and there is a lot to talk about. So just sit back and relax, because we're about to go on a pretty wild ride. Okay, so when it comes to the movies, while there is sound and dialogue, film is still primarily a visual medium. It's all about visual storytelling. It's about the images and what they convey on screen. Because if you can't tell a story visually first, then that's not cinema. It's not film. It's just video recording. And unfortunately, when it comes to movies today, a lot of that sensibility has been lost on many modern fans. And that's a real shame. Perhaps one of the best examples of cinematic storytelling comes from the Lubitsch Touch, named after Ernst Lubitsch. Let's go ahead and turn to one of his films. Here we see the king leaving his chambers with the queen still inside, and as soon as he goes, the guard standing outside sneaks on in. Meanwhile, as the king walks away, he realizes that he forgot his belt, and he turns back, and he goes inside the bedroom, when all of a sudden the king re-emerges with the belt in hand. However, he quickly realizes that it's not his belt because it's too small. And without seeing what's going on inside the bedroom and without having any words spoken, the audience automatically knows what's happened because the story was given to us, all with visuals. But not all visual storytelling has to be this complicated, as it's also in the small details too. Take for instance the concept of the horizon line, that line that separates the land from the sky. Where this is, and more importantly how it's shown, tells you a lot about what you're seeing. Take for example that old picture of a cowboy riding off into the sunset. Here you have big sky weighing down on top of him, he's small, isolated, and he's got the weight of the world on his shoulders. Where in this shot, the horizon line is much higher and instead shows the town that the cowboy is about to enter, showing the road ahead, even though the cowboy himself is still relatively small in the screen. But sometimes it's not just where the horizon line is, but the angle in which it's being shown. Where here on the other hand, you see the cowboy full frame. He's large and in charge on the screen. And also, we're slightly looking up at him, as this is a very important distinction to take note of. And with this, we're finally gonna be talking about some wrestling. Here we have Braun Strowman, and we the audience are looking up at him because the camera is physically looking up at him. He seems towering and imposing, all because we're looking at him from a certain point of view. He's made to look like the monster among men. Now here we have Hulk Hogan, someone who is usually billed at just 1 inch shorter than Braun Strowman or sometimes at the same height. But for his entrance, the camera looks at him straight on, as Hogan was representing the face of the company and not being portrayed as a giant monster. You see the difference here? And it's not just that. Look at how they get into the ring. Braun Strowman pushes down the top rope and steps over it, where Hogan goes in through the second rope. These are all subtle visual cues telling us, the audience, how WWE wants us to perceive these characters. But now, another issue that comes with reading wrestling isn't from the silver screen, but rather it actually comes from the stage. Now, the hardship here is that wrestling is under a different set of circumstances than film. Because wrestling is performed before a live audience in a huge arena, it still has to be fairly theatrical and still maintain some of the over-the-top gestures and body language. That way, even those in the cheap seats can tell what's going on. And while yes, plays were the precursor to movies, once the camera was involved, a lot of what happened to acting changed. Subtlety, facial expressions, realism all started becoming the standard for film acting, where acting on the stage, on the other hand, still stuck to its roots. But wrestling is a unique hybrid where it's still trying to do both at the same time. When you're watching from your TV at home, you're still looking at a live theatrical performance. And when you're watching live in the arena, you still have a big giant TV screen to look at if you want to. And as a result, wrestling is stuck between these two worlds, and so it can't appease both of them simultaneously, at least not completely. And as such, we as an audience have been conditioned to big gestures even on the screen, resulting in many of us becoming numb to more subdued forms of storytelling. This whole thing would be a lot easier if wrestling would just pick a lane, but that is a conversation for another day. Okay, while I can't officially confirm this, I have been told that whenever WWE management looks at footage for a potential prospect, they do so without the sound. That way they can see if they can figure out the story and who's the heel and who's the face simply based off of the visuals alone. And you know what? Either way, that makes for a fantastic litmus test, and it's one that we can do ourselves right now. So in this match right here, within seconds, tell me who's the heel and who's the face. And if you just happen to remember this match, that's not the point of this exercise. Just see if you can tell based off of the actions alone. And again here, without any sound, who's the heel, who's the face. And went with the Big Show this time, a lot harder to tell. And also, same thing with this match here. Now, after watching these examples, you can see that it's fairly obvious who's the good guy and who's the bad guy in each of these matches. And this is the exact kind of body language that wrestlers need to do as much as possible in every match. While it may be a little over the top once you really stop to look at it, it really helps to reinforce the story that's being told. It really helps to drive it on home. Similarly, stand-up comedians will make funny faces when delivering their punchlines, while the face in and of itself may not get a laugh on its own. It helps to highlight, to emphasize, to add punch to a punchline, making sure to take every opportunity to maximize a potential laugh. And so while these gestures in and of themselves may not necessarily get an audience to love or hate a wrestler, they do a great job of heightening what's already there, especially when it's compounded with other actions. So when we see Randy Orton really hyping up the crowd, we know he must be in face mode. And when we see the Big Show grimacing and favoring his hand, we know he's in a vulnerable position, especially when we have the camera looking up at Mark Henry towering over him. Remember that trick? And when we see a distracted CM Punk getting attacked from behind by Daniel Bryan, we know that's not something someone who's above board would do. And this is the major conundrum of wrestling literacy, because whenever we see actions like these or cues like these, they're supposed to be helping to move the story along, helping to move the plot along, because a picture is worth 1,000 words. And therefore, quick bits like this can give us, the audience, so much more information and so much faster than the written word ever could. Or at least, it's supposed to, if we know how to read it. Shorthand, a method of writing rapidly by substituting characters, abbreviations, or symbols for letters, sounds, words, or phrases. And when it comes to reading the squared circle, this is essentially what wrestling literacy is. Well, back in the day, there were some folks who listened to wrestling matches on the radio. Can't imagine that being enjoyable. But the point is, they say that a picture is worth 1,000 words. So instead of having to listen to some commentator tell you how bad somebody's leg is hurting because of a submission hold, we can instantaneously get it just by seeing the hold applied. And it's not just a hold either, as it's also the facial expressions as we previously talked about, as well as their placement in the ring. Are they in the middle of the mat, or are they close to the ropes for a possible rope break? Also, how strong is the person who's applying the move? How weak is the person who's getting the move done to them? Is there a weight advantage? Is there a height advantage? How secure is the hold locked in? All these bits of information can be ascertained right away, and therefore every moment that we see in professional wrestling is a great opportunity to tell an audience a whole myriad of information, and as such, everything we see should have glorious purpose. The only issue is, it doesn't. Now, I'll be the first one to say that with so many wrestling shows on so many nights of the week for so many hours with so many matches that are so much longer than they used to be, it is kind of hard making every single move count. I mean, how many ideas can someone come up with in such a short amount of time? Although, even with that being the case, I still think it's no excuse to let go of certain fundamentals, and the biggest one would have to be selling. Now, this isn't going to be some rallying cry against the lost art of selling, even though it is a lost art. That's gonna have to wait till another episode. But the point here is that moves, every move, needs to have a purpose. When we see a wrestler do a suplex, why did he do this suplex? What function does this suplex have? In this match, how does it work towards the story? The truth is, a lot of things we see in a pro wrestling match really don't serve any function, or there was no thought put behind why they were done. And this leads to moves being watered down and having no purpose. And worst of all, it damages our wrestling literacy because we don't understand the shorthand anymore. The code has been done too many times without having any meaning attached to it that now audiences don't even understand what it means when they see it. And while we're talking about suplexes, many of you may not remember that Harley Race once won the NWA World Heavyweight Championship with a suplex. That's right, a simple vertical suplex. This was once considered a World Heavyweight Championship caliber move, something that in and of itself could make you a world champion. But now a vertical suplex means nothing. People do them all the time and there are no repercussions from it. Not only is this no longer a finishing maneuver, but some wrestlers barely even bother selling their back when they do take them. Even Seth Rollins can do one off of the top rope and then follow it up with another wrestling move and still only manage to get a 2 count. What used to be considered shorthand for back damage is now just filler, as it seems that a lot of wrestling moves today happen with no rhyme or reason other than trying to get the clock up at least 20 minutes. And it's not just wrestling moves. Staying with Harley Race, here's a man who punched very rarely, but when his fist did land on you, it counted. It mattered, just like it would in real life. There's even an entire sport dedicated to the art of punching. And we know that in a real fight, one punch does do damage. But yet, a lot of times in today's professional wrestling, throwing punches might as well be throwing confetti, which, as I already stated, only works to cloud our wrestling literacy even more. Here's an action that we understand what it means, we know what it can do, but in the world of pro wrestling, we have to rewire our brains to register it to mean nothing, thus having another perfectly good message that we as wrestling fans could receive, only to have it end up being completely useless. Another piece of wrestling literature that has seemingly gone the way of the dodo is that of the frustration 2 count, where a wrestler, usually a heel, hits a big move, goes for a cover, and is shocked to find that he only gets a near fall. And yes, this does still happen all the time. The only problem is that whenever it does, it mostly goes unnoticed by us fans. It means pretty much nothing at this point. Now, the reason that this has been registered as obsolete today is because of the nature of the finisher itself and what it means to fans. As we know that most of the time when a wrestler wins a match, it's going to be with his finisher. And so when he hits a move, no matter how big it is not going to close out the bout unless it is his finishing maneuver. But on that token, that does remind me of another problem, because while we do see these moves closing out bouts all the time, just because you see one done doesn't mean that the match is actually coming to a close right then and there, as today we have just way too many false finishes. Because if you stop to think about it, a finishing maneuver should finish the bout by definition alone, but yet we see so many wrestlers kicking out of them on a regular basis. And it's even gotten to the point where some fans get mad if they see their favorite wrestler lose a bout after only one finisher. And in terms of overall wrestling literacy, not only is this a violation to the meaning of the very word, but in addition, it also has cost us something else. It's cost us the ability to feel when a match is over. After decades of abuse of the false finish, we have seen a great many things compromised. For starters, the frustration 2 count that we just talked about also doesn't mean a whole lot now, even after a finisher. But more importantly, we have now become desensitized to the whole practice of the false finish, where a match can last over a half an hour and at no point do we ever think that it's actually coming to a close. And that is a huge problem. More than just reading wrestling, a good match should have a story to it. It should have a beginning, middle, and end that we can feel, that we can sense. But now, thanks to all this overuse, a lot of us wrestling fans have been beaten, well, quite frankly, senseless. And if we can't figure out how a match is supposed to end, then how are we ever supposed to decipher how it's supposed to start? Or how's it supposed to transition in the middle? And for a lot of us, we just don't do that anymore. All because, well, we've lost that ability to sense when something is about to wrap up. Well, there you go, my thoughts on wrestling literacy. But what are yours, and what are some messages that you feel modern fans just don't understand like they used to? Let me know down in the comments, and please make sure that you're subscribed right here to the Thinking Fans channel, and that you give this video a big like. Thank you so much for watching, and of course, thank you to all my amazing Patreon supporters. And if you want to be one yourself, please check out my Patreon page. Thanks again for watching, and as always, Dave knows.